All righty, welcome everybody to Module 4. We're going to look at the economy today. Um, so, talking about the economic dimensions of cities, we're going to look at the economic climate, how that's changed over time, how the economic structure has changed over time, leading up to our modern cities. And we're going to look at, evolving trends and how they could shape the future city as we look at the history of our past cities. So, our first readings, the changing context of economic cities. So we're going to start at the pre-industrial city and we're going to go to the global city. We're going to see how that changes over time. So starting with the pre-industrial city, we see social division based on guild occupations. It's, we're looking largely at the rich in the inner core of the city, and then we're going to look at the poor that are on the outskirts of the city. And with the poor, they take up less space. They have these vertical buildings that focus on, their work and their living in one place. Then we're going to move on to industrial cities. A couple, 100 to 1,000 years later, we're looking at a complete switch. We're seeing the poor moving to the inner cities, and then they're separating the workplace from the home. They're going to factories, and they're moving to suburbs and things like that, where, the rich are now going to the outsides of the city, so they have more space. And the social division is changing. We're not looking at guild structure and the differences in guilds. We're looking at, capitalist divisions. We're looking at class systems and how that changes social divisions, and race and how that contributes to, the capitalist divisions. And along with social divisions, we see ideological divisions. We're seeing people ranging from Marx to, the introduction of Keynesianism and Fordism. Marx and Engels are arguing against the exploitation of capitalism, profiting off the labor of the poor. This is the big industrial movement we're seeing, a rise in thinking about what industrialization really means for the people who are working in those systems. On the other hand, we see Henry Ford, who's, seeing industrialization as an opportunity. They're controlling, the product and the means of production, controlling the supply and the demand. And on the other hand, we're looking at Keynes, who's introduced the idea of Keynesianism, which is the introduction of the government regulating economic fluctuations in capitalist economies, because we're seeing all of this change, this rapid change, and we're looking at commodity fetishism. We're looking at regular people that are trying to show off, or we're seeing competitions within the household to display wealth, not necessarily just competitions within the marketplace. After Fordism implodes, actually, because of its inflexibility, we see this neo-Fordism that emerges. And we're looking at, emphasized flexibility in both the market and the workers. Workers are being paid more, which is awesome. Workers are, getting more benefits. But, we're also seeing more polarization. With each era that changes, we see more polarization socially. And we're seeing, bunker architecture in this time, because we're putting up fences and we're having gated communities, because there's this social division between the people who make money and the people who don't make a lot of money. So the post-industrial society, cities are transformed from these little, cities with few districts, not necessarily little, but you know what I mean, like the few districts. And now we're seeing huge sprawl, where we have the main city, and then we have the outskirts of the city, and then we have like shopping malls and, Targets and all these things that are outside of the city that are, that people can drive to because of the technological improvements. Globalization also occurs. We're seeing more social division even there, and polarization because of that increased market competition. The wage gap is getting larger, and the polarization gets larger, every year. So we're seeing these patterns with industrialization and our economy, and how we're growing apart. Thank you. Now let's go to Aiden.
Thank you, Declan. So next we talked about Nasmyth's megatrends, in particular national economy and world economy. He starts off by talking about how America hit this stride post-World War II, mass industrialism. They cornered the global economy. They were dominating that market share at over 25% of the global economy. They were the top dog, the powerhouse that, the zeitgeist of modern day would think of us still being. Nasbit talks about how we've really fallen from grace in that regard. We're not the industrial powerhouse we once were. We've experienced constant decline over the last 3 decades, and that's led us to a period of complete economic stagnation. And he's mostly trying to convey this point of our time is in the industrial spotlight is coming to an end. And enter Japan, which is one of the foremost industrial countries right now. It's the third highest GMP, $5.9 trillion GMP, with a population that's dwarfed by the top two countries, us and China. And it's really showing how they've captured the market. They have increased productivity, efficiency. They don't deal with what we deal with, which is higher inflation, less productivity, complete stagnation. They have breached that wall that we've hit. And then he goes on to talk about how the world economy is sort of a global economic village right now. And that's because the communication flow is completely dissolved. There's no more gap in communication. Everything's instantaneous. It's all connected, where there's no more gaps, delays in the spread of information. It's all instantaneously connected. And then he goes on to talk about how boom cycles of third world countries will come to shape the global economy, because as certain countries start to deindustrialize, to move away from certain sectors, such as Japan moving away from steel and shipbuilding, other countries will come in to take that point, take that market. You see countries like South Korea will start to become a big shipbuilder. Brazil will start to become one of the leading steel manufacturers. It's all about who's going to take that corner, who's going to be the next top dog in that sector. And that's causing this sort of meshing of, global trade and global interconnection that's just kind of becoming a bit of a mess through these deindustrializing and boom cycles. It goes on to circle back actually to the US and how what their part in this modern economics, climate is, and how we're sort of a sunset sunrise economy where certain aspects of our economy are doing great. Our EV technology completely on top of the global economy, the global market. We've cornered that market for the most part. However, certain other economies or industries that we once were leading in aren't doing so well now. And that's bringing our averages down. So when you average all the markets together, it's bringing us down, it's making us look like we're in a recession. Most economists would say we're in a recession. However, Nasbit argues that it's just a matter of perspective. We need to find new data, new metrics. We don't just average all 50 states together. Why don't we start looking state by state to see what's working, what isn't working, how that is the goal to a better understanding and the resolution of all our issues. And it's going to save, it's going to seem a bit harsh to, look at these dying industries and stop just laying flowers on the grave, stop trying to save them and start looking towards what we're doing right, putting money and time and effort into those industries instead. Next up, we talked about greenfield radical technologies, in particular cryptocurrency. Now, cryptocurrency is a pretty big solution to a lot of global economic problems right now. In particular, it takes us away from these centralized banking institutions that have dominated the global economy for a long time, and it's decentralized peer-to-peer transactions that completely revolutionize transactions as a whole. And it's really sort of coming off the heels of a lot of distrust in banks that have built over the last even century. The Great Depression, the housing crisis, a lot of those have sort of spurned this, I want to, have anonymous peer-to-peer transactions that aren't affected by someone else's inflation or someone else's taxes. It's really an interesting concept that I personally believe will be a driving force in the global economy to come. It's not quite where it needs to be right now. The man who created it stated that it's not supposed to be this investment or this, single inflated price tag. It's just about anonymity and peer-to-peer transactions, decentralized. And next we have Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Aiden. So I'll be talking about the reading of A Green Cities, Nice Places to Live by Dr. B. who's a professor here at Tech. As we all know, climate change has a huge environmental impact. However, we also have to acknowledge the economic impacts that climate change has. For example, if we don't have any mitigation, strategies and a natural disaster hits, the whole environment will not be able to operate properly, causing economic difficulties. These strategies come from public policies with hopes that policymakers work to achieve sustainable growth and reduction in CO2 emissions. Without the right policies, it's tough to move forward, though. However, funding is becoming the difficulty as there is a lack of monetary supply for necessary green investments, which has been a recurring problem in green cities, especially when there are large financial commitments. It can be difficult to say that green cities are nice places to live. This can be difficult and a complex answer as they have a lot of potential. However, it will take a lot of work and money for all the sustainable features to be implemented. So I'll also be talking about how America has been constantly changing and how COVID changed urban migration. From the video, American cities have always been changing. We noticed that the U.S. has a long history of mobility and Americans are known for relocating. However, the pandemic has sparked new trends. As a result, we've seen a large amount of population migration away from these huge urban areas as many people have moved into smaller cities like Denver and Phoenix. We've noticed changes in concepts such as remote work policies as they have become more and more popular and available, leading to a change in the development of cities since people are no longer tied to a single location as there's more freedom in relocation. This highlights how businesses are adapting to the new normal as places like Google have developed tools for their employees to estimate how their salary might change based on remote work. With these changes, neglected cities have been given more and more opportunities as populations have shifted to unseen areas. We've also noticed that a lot of large companies have been moving out of metro regions due to the pandemic. This is reshaping the business landscape. So in conclusion, we learned how cities have always evolved, changed in many different ways, including globalization, communication, remote work, industrialization, and the different ways that has changed the economy over time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.